Hello and good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and begin in just a moment. See the numbers coming in. Welcome. See the numbers. Hello, welcome everybody. I know we're going to go ahead and get started in just a moment. All right. Well, hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Diane Shen, and I'm the collection strategist for the Los Altos History Museum. And on behalf of our staff, I am so excited to welcome everyone to our first online screening event this evening. Before we go ahead and begin our program tonight, the Los Altos History Museum would like to respectfully acknowledge the Muwekma Ohlone people on whose ancestral lands the museum is located. The Muwekma people have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and their historical relationship with the land continues to this day. Tonight, in commemoration of Asian American Pacific Heritage Month, we will be screening the film The Valley, written and directed by Los Altos filmmaker Saila Kariat. Released in the US in March of 2018, The Valley participated in over 20 film festivals and won 5 Best Feature Film awards. This film is an artistic exploration of suicide, mental health, and its intertwined relationship to a very unique culture of high achievement pressure right here in Silicon Valley. I had the immense pleasure to collaborate with Saila for this event and talk with her more in depth about her work and creative vision as an artist. With more and more women filmmakers of color breaking barriers through storytelling, Saila's worldview has personally been so inspiring to me and reminds me of how important it is, especially now, for Asian American women to confidently take up space and share our stories and individual journeys and experiences. So thank you so much, Saila. Saila has generously lent her time to us this evening and is on the screen with me now, as you can all see. So hey, Saila. She will be later joined by journalist and my good friend, Saruchi Mohan, who serves as the chair of the museum's Oral History Committee. So because this program requires some audience participation this evening, I'd like to just briefly go over our schedule with you. And then I will introduce our speakers, and then we will break out into our individual home theaters for the film this evening. So firstly, we are in a webinar format, so we cannot see or hear you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit your questions into the chat box. There is an icon on the very bottom of your screen with one bubble, and that chat box will cascade out to the right-hand side of your browser. The dialogue portion of this webinar is currently being recorded, and we will have this available on our YouTube Learning channel by next week. So if there's a portion of the dialogue that you'd like to revisit, I highly encourage you to check out our YouTube channel when you get a chance. Because we've had such a great turnout this evening, we wanted to make sure that everybody had the best viewing experience. So we will actually be showing the film through a Vimeo. And I will go ahead and send out the link in the chat box, as you can see here. So let me go ahead and send that to you now. And you will go ahead and see in the chat box that there is a URL. So you can go ahead and please click on that URL, and it will open up a brand new browser where you will be able to soon enter into the film. And once you enter in, it will ask you for a password, which we've put up on the screen here for you. And I just want to make note that that is a capital L, capital A, capital H, history, lowercase, capital M, museum with an exclamation mark. So just to make sure that everybody has the right password. So after the film is about an hour, 30 minutes. So as soon as we encourage everybody to begin the film actually at 7:10 p.m. So we're about 5 minutes away from everybody starting the film. And once the film comes to a close, you can go ahead and just close out the Vimeo film browser. Make sure you have the webinar browser, or I'm sorry, the Zoom webinar browser still open, where you can just go ahead and return back and reconvene at 8:45 p.m. so that we can go ahead and begin our conversation portion with Saila, of course, and Saruchi. So at 8:45, when we reconvened to the webinar for the conversation, that's when we will go ahead and begin to open up our Q&A. At that time, I highly encourage everybody to submit any questions they may have for Saila. And at 9:05 p.m., we will jump into a very quick live Q&A with the audience. So we will do our best to get to everybody's questions, but of course, just given the time constraint, we will try to get to everybody's question. The evening program tonight will end at around 9:15 p.m. And we may try to stay on a little bit longer depending on our questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speakers this evening. Saila Kariat is a filmmaker and entrepreneur with a lifelong interest in cinema. After obtaining her PhD in electrical engineering, Saila worked as a product engineering manager at IBM. Becoming the mother of 2 girls prompted her to discontinue working for corporations and start a residential construction company. She pursued her education in film in parallel, obtaining a degree from San Jose State University. Saila has completed 3 other feature screenplays, Gods and Demons, Love in the Time of Corona, and I Was Never Awake. Saila splits her time now between Los Altos and San Francisco. Saruchi Mohan will be in conversation with Saila this evening, and she is an award-winning journalist who has covered high-tech and business news for McGraw-Hill and International Data Group publications. Her columns for progressive media have been distributed to newspapers throughout the country. Her work has appeared in Financial Times, Antioch Review, Bryant Literary Review, The American Gardener, and numerous other publications. In 2009, her first novel, Divine Music, was received with commendable reviews by Publishers Weekly and The Book List. So thank you so much to Saruchi and Saila for joining us this evening. So the time now is 7:08 p.m. and I will go ahead and encourage everyone to begin clicking on the URL link. Go ahead and type in the password. Let me go ahead and put that back up on the screen for everybody to see. And we will reconvene at 8:45 p.m. where we will continue the conversation. And I hope everyone enjoys the film. Thank you so much. I will stay on just for a little bit longer if anybody has questions, and we'll see you soon. to the webinar. I'm just going to take just a moment so that people can start trickling back in and just closing their browsers for just a moment. And we're going to go ahead and shortly begin the next conversation. So I know some of you trickled in a little bit late or had some technical issues, so you may not have been able to finish the film. So the great news is that the Vimeo link will be accessible until midnight tonight. So please feel free to watch, rewatch any section, or you can, feel free to finish the film. Alrighty, so in the interest of time, we will go ahead and jump in straight into the conversation. And just as a quick reminder, please feel free to begin submitting your questions into the Q&A box. You'll see a little toggle at the very bottom, a button with two chat bubbles, so please feel free to submit your questions. So, well, without further ado, Suruchi and Saila are on screen with me now, so take it away, Suruchi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane. Saila, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That was a wonderful movie. It was powerful. A work like this requires much thinking, planning, redoing. What motivates you as a filmmaker?
I've always loved cinema. When I was about 10 years old, I saw a movie by Satyajit Ray, who is one of the great Indian filmmakers. He's the Bergman of India, so to speak, called Postmaster. And it was a very short, simple film, but so poignant and powerful. And I still remember it, even though I was about 10 years old when I saw it. All the shots he did, and the way he, directed the actors. And I kind of realized at that point how powerful cinema is. Of course, novels and books are powerful as well, but cinema has a special power to move people. So at that point, I really became interested in cinema. And this particular film, the genesis of it was quite complicated, as you may know. I actually had several careers before I actually took the plunge and became a filmmaker. It's a risky profession, as we all know. So I took the usual, safe path and studied engineering and worked in it for quite a while. And then, but all in the back of my mind, I always wanted to be a filmmaker. And so it took me many years to get to the point where I actually attempted and made my first film.
That brings me to the next question. When did the idea for this film come to you? And how long did you wait before you started working on it?
So I went back, actually when I was about 40, I went back to film school and got a degree in film. And I wrote a script, an early script, which I liked, called Gods and Demons. Well, it's now called Gods and Demons. And I contemplated making that film. And as all this was happening, I had two children and I was raising my children here in Silicon Valley, and I was witnessing a lot of what's shown in the film, the intense pressure that these kids face, academic and otherwise. And so, the idea for the film came quite a long time ago, probably about 15 years ago. And it's always
that was before you had gone to film school even?
Yes, so it was,
okay.
And then I kind of, as it germinated in my mind, as my children went through high school and so on, it became a bigger pull for me to make this film. And the final push was, I had a brother who suffered from mental health issues. And in 2014, he passed away. And that was the impetus for me to actually write it down, put pen to paper and write down the script. Because until that point, I always thought about the story. It was always in the back of my mind, but I never really wrote it till that point.
How did you put a distance between yourself and your material to make this an objective yet affecting look at mental health?
That's a great question. When you talk about characters in scripts, you talk about what they want, an objective want, and an existential want. Like, for example, if you look at Neal, he wants to find out what happened to her. Like, that's his want, and that's what drives him throughout the whole story. But his existential want is really what goes on at the subconscious level, which is he wants to understand the meaning of everything he's done. Like, what have I done all this for, And he wants to find the meaning of his priorities, basically, whether they were right, wrong, good, bad, And so that's kind of his existential want. And so it's like that even for the writer, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and at a material level, I wanted to write a really good script and a really good story. That was what I wanted. But at subconscious level, there's all these kinds of different emotions going on, and they kind of show up in the script and the dialogue, and you don't even you're not consciously aware of what's motivating you to write those things sometimes. But I think it's all the emotions that you're not processing,
Right. So in terms of putting the distance, did you sometimes find that you've written a piece of dialogue that is so personal, and that you had to take a step back and think, okay, well, I think I need to make this a little more objective. It's too close to home. So, the way your film comes off, it's so objective, and yet it is extremely moving. So there has to be some process, because a lot of times we write something that means a lot to us, or, it's a screenplay or anything. And it's so close to us that it just does not have the same impact on the reader, the viewer. What were you consciously aware of doing something to distance yourself from the tragedy in your life?
I mean, there were parallels to the story, but it was not identical. So in a way, I was distanced. I mean, there is mental health, there is death. The death happened at an older age. It wasn't, Maya is very young. My brother died at a later age. So while there were parallels, there were also commonalities that I could draw from. So it didn't get to the point where I felt like I was writing. It wasn't a memoir or a autobiographical story in any way. It was a fiction, a work of fiction, but I could draw from my own experiences when I wrote their emotions. For example, the whole thing of blaming, like figuring out who to blame, assigning blame. This is something that happens a lot because unlike physical health issues, mental health issues are so complicated and hard to understand in a family that, first of all, just understanding and accepting is such a process. That hey, this person has a mental health issue, and we have to deal with it, him and as such. That acceptance process can take years. And I think things have changed a lot also. I mean, when we went through it in my family, it was decades ago. So it was the level of knowledge and understanding was also very low. So, we had to learn a lot before we could accept. Now, I think the level of awareness is higher. But in any family, just that whole situation of this person has this problem, it's not easy to detect. It's not like, diabetes or some other disease where, there's some metrics and you can measure them. And so it's kind of a complicated, difficult to ascertain problem. And so, going through that and accepting and dealing with it as a family is really hard. And what happens is each person is pointing the finger at the other person. It's your fault. You didn't do this. It's your fault. So those kinds of things I could draw from my own experiences. Mm-hmm. But as far as the actual story, it is far enough removed that I could kind of take myself out of that situation.
Okay. How long did it take you to write and to direct this film?
It took me 1 year really to, probably about a little over that, about 14, 15 months to really get the script solid. I've listened to several podcasts by prolific screenwriters, and they all say, well, you have to write about 12 drafts before you get to a good script. Mm-hmm. And that's about right. I think I wrote about 12 drafts at the end of the day. And, you go through a lot of iterations before you feel happy with it. And even now when I look at it, I wish I had, I still see improvements. It's just, it's an endless process.
Yes. Mental health issues cut across socioeconomic classes. You focused on an individual from a certain ethnic background who was highly successful in the commonly understood sense of the word. You could have picked anyone else from the great diversity that the Bay Area represents. Can you talk about the choices you made and why? And just to be clear, not just these two choices about the main character, but other choices you made, you know, as you put the film together.
I mean, you know, when you start in screenwriting, one of the first things they tell you is write about a world you know. So if I had written, you know, there would always be some pressure to make it a more mainstream family, but the Indian American family is a world I know. And so I chose to make them Indian American for that reason, because I can write with some authority on that. Regarding, I mean, there were so many choices. I mean, whether the person who dies by suicide, whether they were a girl or a boy, that was a choice I grappled with. Because actually, boys, male suicides in that age group are actually more in number than female, believe it or not. So, you know, it would have been, I could have made him a boy, but somehow I felt it would be more sympathetic. Also, I have two daughters, so I can understand girls better, and I felt I could write that better. So that was one of the reasons I made her a girl. So there were, I mean, whether the socioeconomic status, I think one of the misconceptions about mental health is that it only affects, you know, poor people or, you know, people of a certain ilk or whatever. And it's not true, actually. Mental health issues affect all different classes, different races, different ethnicities, it's a far more prevalent problem than people are aware of.
You spent years thinking about this film. You lived with your characters, I'm assuming.
Yes.
As you wrote and produced. When you reached the end, did you feel you had changed?
That's an excellent question. It had profound impact on me. First of all, living with such a heavy story is difficult. It's really hard. I was actually working with a directing consultant. Her name is Judith Weston. She's a very famous. She wrote a book called Directing Actors, which is like the Bible of directing for actors. And I was talking to her, and she said, "You know, you are asking your actors to go to a very difficult place. I mean, you have to be aware of that, right? You know, you're asking them to imagine their child has committed suicide, you know, and or has died by suicide." And I said, "Yeah, you know, that is, you know, I am aware of that, and I'm aware that I have to really make sure, you know, I take care of them, you know, that they're okay at the end." And I think it took a toll on the actors too. Like, I could see it, but I had to live, you know, they worked during that, you know, we did the whole shoot in 21 days. It was a 5-week shoot. We worked, I have never worked so hard in my life as I worked on this movie. We worked so hard. And in that, after that time is up, they kind of go back to their lives and they, you know, they resume. For me, there was the pre-production, which took probably about 8 months, and the post-production, which took another 8 to 10 months. And then there were the whole festival run. So it took another year, and then trying to release it and distribute it. So I pretty much lived with this story for about 5 years.
Wow.
And so I think it was more taxing on me. That also, I wrote it, obviously. That was very taxing, because you have to build the world and build the characters and, you know, write their backstories and think about their world, and, you know, that you have to immerse yourself in their life for the time that you write it. So it was very taxing. I feel I came out of it, I would say, more compassionate than I used to be before. More compassionate of people suffering, more compassionate of their weaknesses, more compassionate about their, you know, flaws and their mistakes. I think before I started this project, I've become more like that after.
When you finished this film, did you feel you had achieved what you set out to do?
I have very high standards for myself, so there are areas where I wish I would have done better. I think when I look, I think, well, I wish I had done this better or that better, but overall, I feel it's a good film. And, you know, I had certain things I wanted to do in the film. Like, I didn't want it to be a triggering. For example, there are other, I won't name names, but there are other pieces out there which have been kind of associated with causing suicides because they're triggering. And I absolutely did not want that. It's the last thing on earth I wanted. So there are certain things I did intentionally. Like, for example, I never show how she dies because that is triggering. And I focused on this, the grief of the family, you know, the after effects, because that is actually a deterrent. I mean, the studies show that if you see, you know, what a lot of people, when they're in that frame of mind, they think, oh, the world would be better off without me, you know, and people, or they'll be better off without me. And that's not true. That's never true. I mean, the people, your family and the people around you, they live with it for the rest of their lives. And so if you show that, you know, that is a deterrent. So I focused on that. So there's certain things, kind of ethical questions, which I feel I really adhered to, and I'm happy about that. Artistic choices, most of them I'm happy. I feel it's an affecting film. And I feel, you know, like one of the executive producers, he watched the film and he said, you know, it made me want to go home and hug my children. And I feel like if that's the effect, it's good. It's a good thing.
It's done its job. So we're running out of time. So one last question. I understand you have written, among others, one screenplay titled Love in the Time of Corona. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, that's actually a romantic comedy I wrote with a friend of mine, Neal Kumar. It's about two very mismatched people who are forced to shelter in place in an apartment in San Francisco because they become roommates just before COVID hits, and then they're quarantining, so they're stuck together. And of course, you know, it's a man and a woman, and of course they fall in love and all that stuff. And but that's the basic story.
So have you started production or?
No, not yet. I wrote another one after that called I Was Never Awake. And I'm debating, I have 3 of them I could work on now. So I'm debating what to pursue. I like I Was Never Awake because it's more along the lines of what I'm used to. It's a drama. It's about a middle-aged woman who's an alcoholic. And her daughter goes away to college. And there's a backstory behind that, but that's the basic premise of the story.
Well, thank you very much, Saila.
Thank you.
We will invite questions from the audience now. Please type your questions into the Q&A box, the one that has 2 bubbles, not the chat box. Diane Shen is the moderator and will take your questions. Diane?
Thank you so much, Saruchi. Yes, definitely. I mean, I was so looking forward to both of you having a conversation tonight. So thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we have quite a few questions coming in, and I am not surprised. I know that we didn't leave too much time for questions, and I know that, Saila, we had so many questions for you, so I will just go ahead and get started with it. All right, so the first one is, what do you wish first generation, highly skilled and educated Asian American immigrant parents did differently to support their kids' mental health?
That's an excellent question. I think one of the things that kids need to feel is they need to feel comfortable showing their vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And when they feel overly stressed and they can't handle the pressures that they have, the academic and other pressures, they need to feel comfortable to go and say to their parents or to their family, at least somebody in their family, that, you know, this is just too much, I can't handle this, you know. And if they feel that they're disappointing you by doing that, then they're very reluctant to do that. So they have to feel that they're unconditionally loved. Like, even if they fail, you still love them. Because certainly nobody wants to fail, right? I mean, everyone wants to be successful. And if they're failing, it's because something else is going on. And, they have to feel comfortable that even if if they fail, you still love them and you will still support them. You're still behind them. I think personally, that's my opinion.
Definitely, definitely. All right. So the next question is, are immigrant youngsters more lonelier than the rest? And within that group, are some communities more vulnerable to depression? Wanted to get your thoughts on the immigrant community. Yeah.
I can only tell you my impressions. I'm not a mental health expert, but I feel that Caucasian communities are also vulnerable. I think the pressures are a little bit different. Immigrant families, the pressures tend to be academic pressures. Whereas for Caucasians, it seems to be more like social pressures. There seems to be a lot of social pressure. Like if you're a girl, you have to have, the best boyfriend or be invited to the prom or whatever it is. There are a lot of social pressures. For Asians, it seems like these pressures are more academic, that you have to be, that they say is an A- is an Asian C. You have to be, you have to come to your class, you have to be, play 3 instruments, these kinds of things.
Right, right. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the film. Can you talk a little bit about the actors and, share any stories about them?
I mean, the actors are brilliant. The main two, of course, Ali Khan and Suchitra Pillai is, I wanted an Indian man about 40 to 45, and I worked with a casting agent, and we were looking, and what ended up happening, most of the actors who are in North America were comedians. They've Aziz Ansari, and there's so many, they're all comedic in nature, and some of them have tried to go and do, dramas, like The Namesake, for example, Cal Penn. But in my opinion, that transition is really hard, because if someone's been really identified as a comedian, it's very hard to take them seriously in this very heavy drama. So I had a very hard time finding anyone. So then I started, I widened the net and I started looking in India and Pakistan. And basically we had some sides and we sent them to Ali Khan, and he taped himself. He did a self-tape and sent them to me. And I was just blown away by his audition. It was so good. And then, so finally, that's how I ended up having a couple of Skype calls with him, and I cast Ali Khan. And then Suchitra I found through an Indian casting agent. And her audition was great too. And it turned out they knew each other for 15 years. So it was just pure coincidence that they really knew each other well, and they felt very comfortable to work together. So, and that was just a blessing.
Wow, very cool. All right. So how do you think about how DESI audience members will view the film versus folks who don't share the culture and might understand the pressures kids face and the values parents hold?
I have a lot of American friends, non-Desi friends, and they've seen the film and they could relate to it. In fact, a lot of them have told me, if you just changed, the actors, that you could get away with somebody that I, associate with. It's not foreign to them at all. I mean, of course, there's some things which are specific. I feel one of the big cultural differences, I feel like if a marriage were like Neal and Rupa had, it might end in divorce here in an easier way. Then, like, Desis tend to try to stick it out, even if it's an unhappy marriage. And so I think they stayed married, even though they weren't very happy with each other most of the time. So I think that's a cultural difference, but in other ways, there's so many similarities.
Right. Very true. All right. So I'm really glad somebody actually asked this question, because I was curious about this myself. Why did you decide to use John Steinbeck's The Pearl as a metaphor throughout the story?
So The Pearl is about how somebody thinks that wealth will solve all their problems. And basically they try to get this pearl because they think it's going to make them a lot of money. And in the process of getting the pearl, they lose everything that they value, which is their baby, basically.
Yeah.
And kind of that's what happened in the story. So I thought the metaphor was really, I could see the metaphor there.
Yeah, very beautiful. All right. How critical to the story was that Neal was a successful businessman?
I think it's very critical because it adds an additional layer of pressure on Maya.
Mm.
The fact that he has reached such heights from starting from such a humble background, and she has a much higher, she started with a much better leg up, right? She's kind of what you say, born with a silver spoon, but still she's struggling. So in her own mind, I think it's even more pressure for her. Like, how could I possibly be as successful as my dad, even though I had so much more opportunity than he did, right?
Right, very true. All right, a couple more questions. A significant theme in Maya's story is that of a girl who feels isolated and unseen. Do you believe that this was a driving force for her death? Was her father's search for answers a way for Maya to ultimately be seen and understood?
It's very true, very astute. Yes, I think she was not seen, and she wanted to disappear to some degree because her real self, she didn't feel it would be appreciated, who she really was.
Right. All right. Throughout the movie, the father is searching for one reason Maya took her life. Was it your intention to highlight the multitude of factors that contributed to her mental health struggles and ultimate suicide?
Yes, because I think he was looking for that one thing that he could pin all the blame on. And it's also the nature of mental health issues. They're very complicated. You can't isolate one thing. It's there's a really good documentary. It's called Three Identical Strangers. It's about triplets who were separated at birth, and they have completely different lives, but they all suffer from depression. Wow. And but the outcomes of each one is different. One of them actually dies by suicide, and the third one is actually okay because of the way that their families handle the situation. So it's such a complicated, so part of it is genetics, part of it is the nature versus nurture kind of debate, right? Part of it is how they're nurtured,
Yeah, very true, very true. All right, so I think we have time for maybe just two more questions. So Saila, what is the hardest thing for you as a filmmaker? Or what is the hardest thing as a filmmaker?
Maybe what is not the hardest thing might be. I mean, film is a very involved field. I think if we look at the entire journey, I mean, none of it is easy, but the most important part is writing the script. It's like if you're trying to build a house and you're developing the blueprint, if the blueprint is not good, it's very hard to, recover anywhere down the process. So in the edit, you can fix, the editing is a whole process into itself. They say, there's the film you write, the film you shoot, and the film you edit, right? So in editing, you can fix a lot of problems. Like you can fix technical issues, you can fix performance issues. You have several different takes. If one performance is bad, you take another take. It's very hard to fix script issues. If the script has fundamental problems, it's really hard to fix it in the edit. I mean, you can do some things, but you can't just, revise the whole script. So the most important part, and this is a shout out to writers out there, the writing is very important.
Very true, very true. All right, I think this is a good question to end the evening on. Are you working on any future projects, and can you tell us a little bit about it and where we can see you in the future?
So I think what I'm going to take forward is I Was Never Awake. It's the opposite of this film in that it's about healing. And it's about how you heal from your own trauma and find a way out of your own pain. And so I hope to, and from my last film, I learned a lot. Like if you look at the Valley. It was so ambitious in its, like, the sets and the shots, and I had drone shots, I had tracking shots, I had steady cam, I mean, you name it, I had it underwater. I mean, and it was just really hard to pull off. And I had international cast, so I was never away, because actually it's 15 shooting days, few locations. So I've made it so that it's a character piece. So fundamentally, I'm going to rely on acting and minimal amount of locations and other things. So,
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to take that forward this year.
Well, that's very exciting, Saila. I hope we can, do more film screenings with you in the future. So the time now is 9:15. So, officially the program is concluded, but I think we will stay for just a few more minutes, maybe to answer a few questions. But for those of you who have to leave the room, we understand. Thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to say, Saila, thank you also. I mean, it's so evident how much heart and soul you've obviously poured into this project. And it's one of the first things that really stood out to me, and it really touched me in a very deep way. And so I hope, through this film, people will grow, will, become more compassionate and understanding to each other. So we're very blessed to have you speak with us this evening. So I hope for those of you who are joining, the museum is actually reopening, and we hope to welcome you back to some more events in person, hopefully. So the museum has reopened with limited hours and capacity. So we are open from Friday to Sunday, noon to 4 p.m. And we currently have the exhibition Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change until July 11th. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saila. So I think we'll go ahead and just take a couple more questions, because I know that there was quite a few and I had to do the hard work of picking here. So, all right, so let's see. So one of the other questions we had was about the film. How did you visualize the immediate or precipitating cause of Maya's decision to actually, die by suicide or make this decision to take her life?
I viewed it as the culmination of a lot of different things happening, one after the other. And so that's what I tried to show in the film. And it's shown, it's a nonlinear, telling of the story. So it's shown in different parts of the film, but basically it builds up each event after the other until she decides to do that.
Right. Okay. And then let's see. So one of the questions is, I am surprised that the topic of Maya, interested in literature and not interested in engineering, didn't bubble up. Was this deliberate?
That was, when she talks to Jake T. Austin, she tells him, I wanted to study literature. It does come in that scene, but it's not something that she shares with her family. It's kind of something she keeps to herself because it's not something they would appreciate. So.
Yeah, very true. All right, and then I think we'll just take two more questions. The questions keep coming in. In a way, this whole movie hinges on interpersonal judgments. In your view, what decreases the adverse consequences of people judging each other?
That's an excellent question. And part of the immigrant experience is the judginess.
Yeah.
Because in general, I can speak particularly about Indian society. There are kind of strict codes of conduct. And so each different, subclass of people, by class, I mean, let's say a girl or a boy or, a girl of certain age, they're all supposed to act a certain way. And if they don't, then there's a lot of judgment put on that by the community. And I don't know how you get around that. I think it's a lot of it has to do with the family of origin, in my opinion. If the family of origin kind of says, okay, we know that, auntie is going to judge you, but it's okay. We don't judge you. You're still okay to us.
Right.
then it gives them some fortitude, some kind of a validation from close quarters is really important. If the auntie does judge them, then they can kind of withstand it. They say, okay, that's just her opinion. I don't have to agree with it.
Yeah, very true. All right, and I think we will have to just take one more question and then we will call it a night. The point in the film when Maya comes home and her mother says, "What's wrong with you?" and "Hope you're not in a sullen mood," clearly showed that there was pressure on Maya to not really open up about her feelings. As we watch the movie, it's clear that each person is struggling with their own identity. Is there a particular character that you personally empathized with more? And if so, who is that?
Wow, that's a good question. To be honest with you, I empathize with Maya the most. Because like her, I was very sensitive when I was growing up. I loved literature and I was very artistic, but I went into engineering. I mean, I obviously survived, but I'm saying it was hard for me to get choice, and so I identified most with her, and she was the one.
Yeah.
And maybe it was doubly difficult to write the story because of that.
Right, definitely. I actually, I myself identify with Maya as well. So yeah, but thank you so much again, Saila. And I don't know how to express, this film, especially at home, right? Here we are in Silicon Valley. So this is it hits home in a way that no other film that we've ever seen can talk about these types of topics, and it's a very intimate, I think, experience that we experience through film. So again, I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you, Saila. And thank you to Saruchi as well. I don't know if she's still here. Let's see, ask the video. Saruchi, are you there? Great. Well, thank you so much, Saruchi, for joining us as well. And I'm so appreciative to be able to share the screen with both of you this evening. And you've both been really inspiring. So thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will go ahead and sign off, and we hope to welcome you back to the museum very soon. Thank you so much. Have a great night.